extra, and I want to say I've seen some claps, but that was the best one I've ever seen. It's stunning. I was in Belmarsh for a £5 million cocaine importation from Bogota. I don't know if you know what the special unit is in Belmarsh. It's a remand centre for the 40 most criminally minded criminals in Europe. I found myself in there with Worms and Steele. And I was in there for the murder of the Essex boys. 3 drug dealers in a Range Rover. We got shot. Now there'll always be a little bit of intrigue and mysteriousness around that murder. Once you've been locked up with somebody 23 hours a day, please believe me, you know them in a better kind of way than maybe their wife does. You learn men. Still, he was a very clever man. He planned everything so precisely. Everything you needed to tick off to make it work, he had it inside him in abundance. Steele and Worms had a very close friendship, but there was definitely a leader and a follower. I don't know if they killed Tucker, Tate and Rolf, but anything Mr. Steele said do, I think Mr. Worms would do. Vicky Steele, but there's an aura in some people. And it comes out of their pores, you can almost taste it. You can smell it. And he had that.
I spent 29 years completely, utterly committed and dedicated to policing. Back in the 90s, murder was going through the roof at the time, shootings, stabbings all over the place. So you were constantly pitting your wits, your knowledge, your experience against criminals. I loved it, absolutely loved it. When you're in the police, your focus is on catching bad guys. I thought that all convictions are correct. It wasn't until after retiring that I started to realise there are wrongful convictions and cases that deserve to be looked at again. And so I started taking on board people who were retiring from the police. We built TMI. One day I got a phone call from Jack Wames's defence team about the Essex boys' murders. I had skin in the game because I had been the person who arrested Darren Nichols, the man who claimed to be the getaway driver, and went on to give evidence against Steele and Worms. As far as I was concerned at the time, they were guilty in the story. Basically, she said to me, Jack Worms and Michael Steele always protested their innocence. They say they have spent over 25 years in prison for a murder they didn't commit. But after numerous appeals and applications to overturn their convictions, they're running out of options. The defence team then sent me through some material, and I realised there were still questions being asked about whether or not Darren Nichols did or did not tell the truth. Looking back now, you start to doubt some of the things that you thought were correct at the time. I said, let's look at this.
It was a crime which pushed everything else off the front pages. 3 men, all known criminals, found shot dead in the Essex countryside.
It was beside this farm gate near Chelmsford that the Range Rover containing the men's bodies was found. All three were shot in the head at least twice at close range with a shotgun. Patrick Tate, who was 37, Craig Rolfe, aged 26, and Anthony Tucker, who was 38, were said by detectives to be members of an underworld drug-dealing hierarchy. All had criminal records.
Two ruthless gunmen, Michael Steele and Jack Womes, received 3 life sentences at the Old Bailey. Today's convictions have been described as some of the most important in Essex in the past 30 years.
In sentencing the two men to life imprisonment, the judge told them they were dangerous with a hard and ruthless edge.
Even now, all these years later, people are still talking about it on social media. There are so many different suggestions as to what happened. There's books, there's films. Some say they did do it, and some say they didn't. This case has created a mythology of its own. But you've got to cut through all that noise, speak to witnesses, go back to the papers, check everything that was presented in court, and get to the truth. So on the night of the murders, Michael Steele is alleged to have set up a drug deal with the victims and lured them, on the pretense of that, down Workhouse Lane in Retterden here. So the prosecution say they have a number of pieces of evidence that put Steele and Womes at the scene of these murders. The majority of evidence comes almost exclusively from this one man, the getaway driver, Darren Nichols. On the one hand, you've got these two men who have spent every single day possessing their innocence, and yet on the other side, you've got the fact that the Crown were able to establish that there was a potential motive and that Michael Steele and Jack Womes had been connected to the victims going back years.
Back then, before everything that happened, their older brother Jack, he was just a normal guy. We done everything together. We was sort of like twins, really. Back in the 90s, me and Jack used to have a speedboat, and Jack would be driving that boat all day long. It was happy days. Jack was a mechanic. He just loved boats and cars and motorbikes. And then me and Jack got in trouble for some cars, basically it's an insurance fraud. Went to prison, 16 months. It was a shock to both of us, you know. But this is where Jack and I met Michael Steele for the first time. He told us he got caught with some drugs. He was flying it into the country because he's a pilot, Mick Steele. He was a little bit older, wiser, you know, very clever man. So Jack, it was sort of like having a father on the wing. He was in a cell dead opposite. And then there was Pat Tate, one of the Essex boys. Mick was his friend when I was his cellmate. He was 20 stone, steroid up, drug taking monster, but towards me, he was a lovely guy, you know, become me mate. I'm sleeping in the same room, do you know what I mean? You've got to be able to go to sleep if you're sleeping next to someone like that.
37-year-old Patrick Tate spent 10 years of his life in prison for robbery and drugs offences. Even inside, he kept up his obsession with bodybuilding.
Without the gym, you'd be lost, you know what I mean? There's nothing to do here, right? And when you're over the gym, you're a different world, and you forget about prison, you're training, you know what I mean?
He had that violent side of him, Pat. He could change just like that. There was a cell thief in there because there was phone cards missing. Some guys took it on their behalf to beat him up. And me and Pat walked back from the canteen up the stairs, and the guy lay there with his nose bleeding. And Pat said, what are you doing? And they said, we're teaching them a lesson. Pat said, no, that ain't how you do it. smashed the sauce bottle, put it in his face, turned the sauce bottle, and the blood come back into our room. Then he picks the guy up, takes him over the landing, just drops him. Boom. The guy didn't die, the guy went to hospital, he never come back. Pat just done it as if it was nothing. You know, he was a very, very strong guy.
Go. Go.
Everyone in the underworld knew Pate. He was a one-man army on his own. You just looked at it and you knew that that could and was well capable of hurting you. After he did the prison sentence, Pate was for hire. He started working for Tony Tucker. Tony was the businessman. There was the brains and the brawn there. And it worked perfectly. Tony was already taking over the whole drug scene in Essex. Just having Pate on board made it, let me make you an offer you can't refuse. Yeah? My complaints department. Having Hercules in his army, Tony Tucker grew ever so quick. But Pate wanted to be more than just a muscle. In the era of the rave scene, when everyone was getting rich with the narcotics, Pat knew what amounts of money could be made. He wanted him and Sony to be the biggest buyers in the market.
The early 90s, drugs were coming everywhere. There's a lot of small fields scattered all over Essex. A lot of small planes were bringing stuff over. Tony was my best pal, you know what I mean? We'd spoke every single day of the week. I could see us getting deeper into the drug world. But when Pat came on, it was a different level. Pat wanted to keep going, that one step more. It was like he wanted to see, you know, what they could get away with. Pat started talking about Mickey Steele. He was called Mick the pilot. He said that he had formed a friendship with him in prison. If you wanted drugs, Mickey was the man to go to. He was known for flying parcels in and dropping things off for people in fields in Essex. Tony jumped straight on board with Pat's idea. He just thought he would make a lot of money. But then, a few weeks before they died, Mickey Steele brought over the parcel of drugs. And it was no good. And they couldn't sell them. Pat went ape shit, wanted the money back. Pat threatened Mickey Steele, said, if I don't get my money, I'll fucking shoot you. He threatened to kill Mickey Steele. And that world, you can't let Pat just threaten to kill you. He was really dangerous. It's got to be dealt with. I met Tony a couple of days before, the night they died. We were all having a drink and Tony said it was all being put right. Pat and Mickey, they were going to sort it out. I went, are you sure? He went, yeah. Mickey had a plan to do another big drug deal. And I remember the reason they were going down this country lane, it was a dummy run, organised by Mickey. He was going to be in the car with them, take him to the spot, show exactly when the plane was going to come in, what the field was, where to park. So my eyes, I didn't think there was any danger, nor did they. Everyone thinks I know how actually killed them. I don't know. I don't know who pulled the trigger. It's all whispers and rumours. But Mickey still had took them there. He took them to their death.
prosecution alleged that Mickey Steele, fearing for his life, worked with his friend Jack Worms to set up the ambush. So if one is guilty, so is the other. According to the prosecution, Jack Worms comes out of the bushes and shot dead 3 men in cold blood in an extremely professional manner. The question is, could a petty criminal with no previous history of firearms really have carried out one of the biggest gangland murders in UK history?
The 2 men found guilty of the notorious Essex boys' murders, Michael Steele and Jack Worms, are serving life sentences at a high-security prison.
As a journalist, I've always been drawn to stories of miscarriage of justice. I have a very strong sense that justice should be fair. One day I was sent a short letter from the category A prisoner deemed to be dangerous. This was Jack Worms, the man who was convicted of the Range Rover murders. He asked me to look at his case, so I went to meet him in a Cat A prison. Going around it, it's very similar to airport security, only worse. They lift your hair up, they check your feet, everything is scanned. Then I was led into a very, very small room, maybe 5 foot square. The chairs bolted to the floor, the table bolted to the floor. And the prison officer said to me, Jack will be coming through that door. If he gets violent or attacks you, that's the panic button. We'll only be about 2-3 minutes to get to you. The door opened and this man, 6'3", 6'4", and built, walks in. And he said, I've been wanting to do this for a long time. And he grabbed me, and then he gave me this massive bear hug with my feet sort of almost dangling, you know? And he said, thank you for coming to see me. I sat down with him for a long time, talking with him.
Yeah, but me, because you're stuck in here for so long. Family's suffering. Believe you me, they're suffering. Getting me freedom, getting me wife and kids is more important than anything. I don't class it as a weakness, but I can tell you now. Many nights I've made me pillow wet, tears. Mainly because of my wife and kids.
When I said goodbye to Jack and left, the prison officer who told me about the panic button came to see me. It had obviously been a joke. As we walked out, he said, we all know he didn't do it, you know.
On the 6th of December 1995, the Crown's case is that they came down the lane in darkness. There was a metal gate here, 5-bar gate, and according to the Crown's case, Michael Steele got out of the rear of the Range Rover, goes to the 5-bar gate, which is locked, and at that point, Jack Worms is in the bushes hiding. Jack Worms comes out of the bushes with a pump-action shotgun. He then comes to the rear offside door of the Range Rover, and then 6 shots, bang, 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 into Tucker, Tate and Rob. He then comes round at the other side of the Range Rover. Another shot fired from here, bang, breaks the window into Tate. and then there's a further shot fired from here into Tate's head. Every shot hit its target in an extremely professional way. What's strange is that Steele is meant to have travelled here with the 3 victims in the rear of the Range Rover, but the vehicle had no fingerprints, no fibres, no blood that linked either Steele or Wones to this scene. So the question is, how did Steele and Wones carry out this murder and yet leave no forensic trace at all?
Scenes of crime officers have already carried out an initial inspection of the vehicle, and it is towed away for further tests to be carried out on it. At most murder scenes, bodies are removed separately, but in this case, the Soccos have advised that the bodies be kept in situ. Is it normal for them to cover the vehicle up?
Yes, it is, because it will probably undergo some further forensic examination back at the police station.
The Range Rover is the original crime scene. F424 MPE, that was the vehicle that they died in. And quite incredibly, we found it. We would love to do our own forensics, but we haven't been able to get access to the samples that we can test against. But it's an opportunity to establish as best we can what actually happened. Is the prosecution account plausible?
It's a very strange vehicle. There's so much conspiracy about it. It's just a very eerie thing to be in and around. We didn't know anything about the vehicle when it was auctioned. We just thought we had got an old classic Range Rover. It was only when we looked into documentation that we started to uncover what we had.
Richard,
Nice to meet you.
David, Philip, and Angela.
Nice to meet you.
The Crown's case is that Michael Steele travelled in the rear of the Range Rover to the scene.
Yeah.
In your opinion, would he leave forensic traces?
I'm sure he would have done. This is a very, very tight space. And when you get into a confined space like this, with lots of nooks and crannies in the seam lines, you will inevitably dislodge fibres from the surface of your clothing.
Right.
You'll touch things, you'll touch seat back, you'll touch door handles. I'm sure that there would have been some signs left from them. But then, of course, in the mid-90s, DNA techniques weren't as sensitive. And it also depends on how well the thing's examined and how many samples are taken. Looking at the record, it seems that not enough time was spent at the crime scene examining it in detail because it was muddy and it was snowy. And so the vehicle appears to have been taken onto the low loader quite soon, and dragging the car onto a low loader might have dislodged any tiny particles.
And what about Jack Wones, the shooter?
The shooter was actually positioned fairly close range. If you have the barrel of the gun close to or actually inside the vehicle, and essentially 8 shots being fired through the open door, the vast majority of the gunshot residue will be deposited in the vehicle. However, some of it will actually come back and go onto the shooter.
Right.
And then it appears that the gunman has walked around the car and fired a further 2 shots through the window, and a lot of the glass and blood will actually come back at you. The glass fragments will actually be deposited on the shooter's clothing.
Right, effectively the shooter's got glass on them, blood, firearms residue on their clothing, but there is no forensic trace material in the vehicle that allegedly picked them up, which is strange.
Absolutely. When you think about the activity that the shooter was engaged with, there ought to be some evidence of it.
throughout my policing career, there are very few cases I've seen like this, where two men are convicted almost exclusively on the word of one witness, the getaway driver. Clearly, Darren Nichols was absolutely vital. So we have to get to the bottom of his account. Is Nichols telling the truth? Is his version of events the correct story, the true story of what really happened on that evening? Darren Nichols is a bit of a mystery. What we do know is that he met Michael Steele and Jack Womes in prison, and when they got out, Nichols gets involved in the drugs trade. He says he would get paid to travel out, pick up the drugs, bring them back into the UK with Steele and Womes, and there's evidence that supports that. Michael Steele was a drugs importer, absolutely no doubt about it. He was criminal, self-confessed. What's much more disputed is what happens next. 6 months after the murders of Tuckertat and Rolfe, Darren Nichols was arrested with 10 kilos of cannabis. He was probably looking at a long prison sentence. And at that point, in that interview, he named Jack Womes and Michael Steele as being the people who carried out the murders.
Lee brings me up and he says, we've got a coke deal going down. You drive. Mick was going to be coming to the deal, but with the others in a Range Rover. He said, Jack will be there, Jack Womes. So then Jack's in the car with me. Jack said, meet me back here when we phone you. Jack got out of the car, he had a bag with him. We just thought, run in. Mate, and he said, alright Darren, come and pick us up. Jack Womes got back in the car, then Mick's got in front of the car. And he said, those fuckers are out of our hair for good now. Fucking sorted them right out. Killed all three. I'm just sitting there thinking, fucking hell, don't ever want to upset these two.
Darren Nichols was pivotal because, to be truthful, from the murder scene down the lane, there was pretty scant evidence that would help us detect who had committed this crime. We had no witness, we had no forensic evidence. Now, this man was able to put Steele and Womes at the scene as the murderers. He clearly knew a lot about Michael Steele and Jack Womes and how they had been dealing with the Essex boys and selling them large quantities of drugs. He made several statements about what he saw and what time he went there, what was said in the car. There's an enormous amount of detail, and although you have to acknowledge that he was looking at a fairly substantial prison sentence for a drugs offence, so there was an element of saving his own skin. His evidence was examined in great detail, and it was pretty clear that what he said was true.
So according to Darren Nichols, the plan on the night of the murders was that the victims would meet with Steele at a pub, giving Nichols and Womes a chance to drive to near where the crime happens. Womes allegedly gets out the car and hides behind the trees. Meanwhile, it's alleged that Steele then gets into the back of the Range Rover and then leads them down the lane to where Womes is waiting. Nichols then says that at 18:59 he gets a call to pick up Steele and Womes and they drive off. So the victims have to be dead by this time. But crucially, just under an hour earlier, 18:06, one of the victims, Pat Tate, had made a phone call from here in Basildon. So the victims were alive at 1806 here and dead by 1859 here. So what we need to do now is test out this timeline. Do the timings fit? Albert, ready to go?
Let's go. I've done 31 years at the sharp end of Liston dealing with murders, and after I retired, Dave invited me onto his team. For me, the timeline is crucial to this whole investigation. If we could prove that Tucker, Tate and Rolfe were alive after 7 p.m, it would mean Darren Nichols' account is not the truth. We're going to now follow the route that the Range Rover had to have taken to the crime scene.
We're heading down to Gordon Road. Gordon Road was the address of Pat Tate.
This is actually the last 100% corroboration of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe alive, all together in the Range Rover.
The phone call that Pat Tate makes at 1806 is from his hardline phone in that house. Rolfe and Tucker turn up in the Range Rover, and Pat Tate be leaving that house there and coming out here to get into the Range Rover.
Yeah.
This is where their journey starts. Right, we're off. Start the clock. They have to be dead by 1859. And 26 years ago, there was snow everywhere.
Yeah.
Ice. The M25 had a 13-mile tailback.
Because of the weather condition. This is likely to be a quicker day.
So we're now approaching what was the Hungry Horse. This is the car park that allegedly Michael Steele gets into the back of the Range Rover with the victims, going to direct them
To the murder scene, which is 10 minutes up the road.
That is that Holmes is ahead and waiting.
that's where Holmes has been dropped off by Nichols. We're getting close to 7 o'clock and we're running out of time.
We're now literally 4 minutes away from their assassination. So that window of opportunity for the murder to have taken place has reduced down to minutes. Jack Williams is now making that call. Jack Williams is actually phoning to say, come and get me. The murders have already been committed. We're not even at the scene yet. Effectively, we are late for the murder. Well, we've arrived shortly after the time that they were murdered, according to Nichols' account. Even if you've broken every speed limit and got here another minute, 2 minutes earlier, even then, it's extremely tight for Mick Steele to have gone to the gate, Jack Williams to have come out the bushes, 8 shots fired, then gone and made the phone call. It's all rushed.
Yes. We've asked this question of ourselves often. Could they have got from A to B in time here before they were killed? And from the timings perspective, very tight.
Nobody else in the country was looking at mobile phone evidence and trying to track people's movements through it. But to my surprise, one young member of the team came to me and said, look, Gov, if you've got a mobile phone that's switched on, its signal makes a connection with a mast and you will be tracked. And I looked at him frankly, and I hadn't got a clue what he was talking about, but through Jack Wone's mobile phone information, we were able to identify the vital phone call to Nichols. And we were able to prove Wones was close to the lane where this murder took place. So that really was some fairly crucial evidence.
In a landmark moment for British justice, the Ressendon murder trial is one of the first to use cell site evidence, which the prosecution say places one of the defendants at the scene of the crime.
I was already a criminal at Old Bailey's house when I was given the brief to represent Mr. Worms. We were concerned because there was the suggestion that Nichols' story was corroborated by the cell site evidence. And of course, we were going to challenge all this. Jack Worms was adamant about protesting his innocence. Worms admitted being in the area, so what was he doing? According to Mr. Worms, he was driving with a trailer to collect the car that had apparently broken down. The very car that Nichols is saying is being used for the actual murder. And Worms is making some call to Nichols from a pub called the Wheat Chief to say about the collection of that car. But we needed the picture painted to the jury. And we found a distinguished, totally independent expert to test the cell site evidence.
I have been involved in well over 100 cases and normally been quite happy with what's happened in the trial. But this was different. The prosecution would say that on the night of the murders, that Jack Worms, after the execution, made a telephone call from here to Darren Nichols to come and collect him. That call was served by the Hockley cell site, but that cell site is over the other side of that hill, which effectively blocks the signal to the cell site. And not one of the tests that I made walking up and down the lane connected with the relevant Hockley cell site, and therefore it would be very unlikely that the call that Jack Worms made could have been made from the lane here. Then I went to the Wheat Chief pub where Jack Worms says he was recovering Nichols' car. From the cell site through to the Wheat Chief is a clear line of sight path. The measurements I made would indicate that the call could easily have been made up from the pub, which corroborated Jack Worms' alibi.
Ever since the trial and convictions, there has been a dispute over whether or not the evidence from the telephones and the cell site was correct. Now, mobile technology has moved on, so we can't go back and look at it again. Which means that for us as a review team, it may never be resolved. So it brings us back to Darren Nichols. Stephen Worms spent over 25 years in prison because of his testimony. And we are going to have to ultimately answer one question. Did he lie or did he tell the truth?
Everything I've told you is absolutely true. I've got no reason to lie. I've told you the whole truth about everything.
It became known as the Range Rover murders, but it was more than that, a clinical gangland execution. Drug dealer Darren Nichols, who claimed he'd been the getaway driver, is now living under a new name under police protection.
It was his evidence that would prove crucial in the conviction of the two men.
The trial went on 5 months. Near the end of the cross-examination of Nichols, we thought, yes, we're on the winning streak now. So did Jack and Mick. By the end of the trial, the judge turned to the jury and he said, heed my advice. If you believe Darren Nichols, convict. If you don't believe him, acquit them men. Heed my advice. And then the jury goes out. Monday morning comes and they called the jury back and thought, yes, we've got a verdict. Verdict's here. You're on the edge of your seat. The judge said, former jury, have you come to any decision? And when they come out with guilty, like all your blood in your body just gone to your feet. You know, you're just sitting there, what? You know, you just can't, you just couldn't believe it. Members of the jury cried. 4 members of the jury broke down. Jack Mick, they never commented or shouted or nothing. They just walked out.
We've got a man who's come forward and says he knows something about nickel testimony. He's seen on social media that Steele and Williams are planning a new appeal and wants to meet us. And apparently he was in the same cell block as Darren Nichols in the Witness Protection Programme.
Is he credible?
Well, he's definitely putting himself at risk, and I don't see any reason why he's lying.
I think this is it. It's got to be it. Yeah, that's it. Thanks for bringing me with us. Can you just take us back to the very beginning and explain how you come to meet Darren Nichols?
I was in the Protective Witness Programme. Book manufacturing ecstasy tablets. Darren Nichols turned up at the unit. He was there for several months, walking away testifying against Steele and Warren. He hadn't given evidence yet.
What did he say about the murders?
Everybody had heard about the Range Rover murders. He would, I suppose the best way to describe it would be to hold court, if you know what I mean. But he never expanded on what actually happened. But when the Bailey's trial was getting near, he came into my cell one day and said, can I talk to you? And he shut the door. He then sat down and proceeded to tell me that what he was going to say on the witness stand was coached by the police. They want him to memorise this timeline. It's in specific detail, but he was trying to get that script wrong.
He said this, did he? Yeah. That he'd been coached by the police.
Right.
Why didn't you come forward at the time?
At the time, I assumed there was a whole raft of forensic evidence, and I'm assuming that Darren's evidence is just the icing on the cake. And it was only very much later, after the trial, that it hit me that it was Darren's evidence that had convicted Steele and Holmes.
The fact is that this murder was so high profile, there was massive media pressure at the time for the police to solve this case. And the only people who are going to be able to answer the question whether or not they crossed the line to get a conviction is the officers themselves and Nichols.
When I was a senior investigating officer, I very rarely got involved with interviewing the people who had been arrested. But I'm pretty certain that Nichols would have been handled correctly. At the end of the day, the police don't coach. And what I do know is that what Darren Nichols presented to the court was examined in minute detail, and the jury believed what he was saying.
The stakes are high. Darren Nichols' evidence has effectively put two men in prison for their entire lives. But for me, what we found raises serious doubts about what he said on the witness stand. Now, I'm much more concerned about the convictions, and if there is a question about their guilt, if they were innocent, the man who actually did do the murders is still walking the streets.
Who killed Pat, Tony and Craig?
I'll tell you what happened.
You try to get to the truth of the murders, and this is the truth.
Various people have come forward and say that they are the killer.
I wasn't bothered about the money. It was principle.
If you rise up and then you're doing bad things to other firms, there will be a comeuppance for that.
I had to kill them to get them off my family. And if I'd have died with it, that was irrelevant. I had to kill them. But somebody got in there first.